Caspian Volek was the charming husband everyone admired, until Elira Grieve, his radiant wife, vanished without a trace, and his own body was later found burned beyond recognition. But when her bones surfaced miles from the supposed crime scene, and no trace of Caspian could be confirmed, a chilling question emerged. Had the killer faked his own death to escape justice? Elira Volek had always been the calm within any storm. A respected wildlife photographer with an eye for rare birds and isolated landscapes, she lived a quiet life with her husband, Caspian Volek, in the shadowy woods outside a sleepy town called Dovetail Ridge. Their home was nestled at the edge of the forest, far from nosy neighbors and the sounds of modern chaos. To everyone in town, they seemed like the perfect couple, reclusive but loving, private but polite, but perfection is often a thin veil stretched over something broken. The last time anyone saw Elira was on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the wind dragged leaves across the road like forgotten secrets. Elira had been walking her golden retriever, Marlowe, wearing her signature forest green parka and brown boots. Neighbors waved from across the street. She smiled, as she always did, and vanished down a winding path. That was it. After that moment, Elira Volek was never seen alive again. Later that evening, Caspian told their closest neighbor that Elira had left on a sudden trip to visit a friend in West Haven, a town 3 hours away. No one found this strange at first. Elira often took last-minute photography trips when rare bird sightings were reported. But when Harlan Grieve, Elira's younger brother, tried to call her that night, her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried again the next day. Still nothing. On the third day, concerned and restless, Harlan made the long drive to their house himself. When he arrived, Caspian answered the door, looking pale and disheveled. He explained, almost too casually, that Elira still hadn't returned. He claimed she had sent him a text the night she left, saying she needed time to think and that she wouldn't be reachable. Something about it felt off to Harlan. The house was eerily quiet. Elira's car keys were still hanging on the wall. Her camera gear was in its usual spot, untouched, and Marlowe, the dog she never left behind, was locked in the laundry room without food or water. Harlan called the police that same evening. Officers from the Dovetail Ridge Police Department arrived within the hour. Caspian allowed them in but showed little emotion. He repeated the same story. Elira left on her own. No fight, no warning, just walked out. But there were already signs that contradicted that. The officers found no packed bags. Her toothbrush and makeup kit remained in the bathroom. A wallet with her ID still sat in her purse by the door. Then a neighbor came forward. 2 nights before Elira disappeared, she had heard shouting coming from the Volek residence. Not just a raised voice, screaming, crashing sounds, a door slamming. She had considered calling the police but decided against it. Dovetail Ridge wasn't the kind of town where people assumed the worst. Now she regretted staying silent. A formal missing persons report was filed. Within 2 days, crime scene investigators arrived. A thorough sweep of the home began. At first everything seemed clean. Too clean. But under the living room rug, specialists discovered faint traces of blood. A field test confirmed it was human. When they searched the backyard, they found a recently used fire pit filled with scorched items. Among the ashes was a partially melted bracelet with the inscription "To Elira, Forever, C." It matched one she often wore in her nature photos. Caspian claimed the blood was from a nosebleed and the bracelet had been accidentally thrown out. The explanations were flimsy. The fire pit had been used in the middle of the night, something no neighbors recalled seeing or smelling. As evidence mounted, Caspian began to unravel. He stopped cooperating. He lawyered up. A search warrant was filed. The story gripped the town like a storm. A beautiful woman, missing without a trace. A husband with no alibi. A home filled with silence and secrets. Elira Volek was gone, and all signs pointed to a violent end. Caspian was named the primary suspect, but without a body, without a confession, the case remained uncertain. What truly happened that night in the woods was still buried, and no one could imagine just how twisted the truth would become. Caspian Volek's quiet composure began to crack as the investigation deepened. Though he insisted Alira had left of her own free will, the evidence against him was piling up, casting a long shadow over his every word. The public image of a grieving husband started to fade, replaced by the chilling possibility of a calculated killer hiding behind a calm face. The blood found under the rug couldn't be ignored. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Alira's. There were no signs of a wound that would have caused such a spill naturally. This wasn't the aftermath of a minor injury. And the fire pit, with the charred remains of Alira's bracelet and other scorched belongings, hinted at something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. Investigators combed through the couple's digital life. Alira's social media had gone dark the day she vanished. No posts, no messages, no logins. It was as though she had simply vanished from the digital world. Caspian's phone, on the other hand, told a different story. GPS data showed a troubling detail. 2 nights before Alira was reported missing, Caspian had driven out into the dense forest surrounding Lake Emberlyn. The trip took place between midnight and 4 a.m., and his truck returned covered in dried mud and fresh scratches. When questioned, Caspian claimed he had gone for a drive to clear his head. But why at such an odd hour? And why delete the trip from his GPS history? Detectives recovered the deleted data using specialized software. The route led to an unmarked trail deep in the woods, inaccessible to most vehicles. Caspian had visited the same location twice more in the days following Alira's disappearance. It didn't take long for the search team to head there with dogs and drones. But no remains were discovered, no clothing, no tools, just disturbed soil and burnt wood that hinted at a hasty fire, likely intended to destroy evidence. Walt Caspian's financial records began to tell a story of their own. A week before Alira vanished, he had withdrawn over $12,000 in cash from 3 separate banks. He had also closed out an old storage unit rental he hadn't visited in years. Surveillance footage at one ATM showed him wearing a hat pulled low, sunglasses and gloves. Odd behavior for someone who claimed nothing was wrong in his life. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered even more strange details. Caspian had purchased camping supplies, waterproof bags, and a satellite phone, all in cash from different stores in different towns. Then came the breaking point. Just as the police were preparing to bring charges for suspected foul play, Caspian disappeared. His vehicle was found near the edge of a cliff overlooking the icy waters of Lake Emberlyn, the same lake he had visited suspiciously in the weeks prior. Inside the car, police found his phone, wallet, and a note scribbled on the back of a torn envelope. The handwriting, though shaky and rushed, read simply, "I'm sorry. I tried to live with it, but I can't." It appeared to be a suicide note. Given the mounting evidence, the authorities assumed Caspian had taken his own life to avoid trial. Divers scoured the lake for days, but no body was recovered. Sonar scans found nothing. No drag marks or signs of a fall were evident near the cliff. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The town of Dovetail Ridge was once again thrown into confusion. Was this the end of the case, or another layer in an increasingly twisted mystery? Without a confession and without a body, either Alira's or Caspian's, there were more questions than answers. Some believed Caspian had truly taken his own life, a final act of guilt. Others whispered theories that he had staged the scene, just like he might have staged the disappearance of his wife. The press descended like vultures. Headlines ranged from tragic love story to cold-blooded murder, suicide. But for those closest to Alira, nothing about Caspian's disappearance felt genuine. There was no body, no conclusive proof of his death, just a note, a car, and a cliff. And so the story took a darker turn. With both husband and wife missing and one presumed dead, without a trace, the investigation hovered in limbo. It was no longer just a hunt for a killer, but a ghost. Months passed, and winter wrapped Dovetail Ridge in a suffocating blanket of silence. Snow covered every inch of the woods, erasing tracks, burying secrets. The town moved on with cautious steps, unwilling to speak Alira's name too loudly, as if afraid it might summon something dark. Caspian Volik's disappearance had become a morbid legend, half truth, half nightmare. Without a body, he was officially labeled as presumed deceased, but few believed it. Law enforcement maintained an open case, but without new leads, it grew cold fast. Harlan Grieve refused to let it go. His sister's absence haunted him. He was sure Caspian had faked his death. The note, the car, the cliff, it all seemed rehearsed, designed to distract. Harlan couldn't understand why more people weren't questioning it. Illyra wouldn't have just vanished. And Caspian? He was too clever, too calculating to throw himself off a cliff without making sure no trace remained. So Harlan began his own investigation. He pored over every document, every receipt, every trace left behind. He requested copies of Caspian's old tax filings, searched property records for anything in Illyra's or Caspian's name, and hired a private investigator named Sanja Quaid, a former federal analyst with a reputation for uncovering buried truths. Sanja followed a hunch and focused on the storage unit Caspian had emptied shortly before Illyra vanished. The facility's security footage had long since been erased, but the front office had a paper logbook. One entry stood out. Caspian's name signed in shaky handwriting 3 days before Illyra was last seen. The unit had since been re-rented, but Sanja convinced the current tenant to allow a forensic sweep. Under the thin plywood floor, police found a hidden compartment. Inside was an empty duffel bag with faint traces of dry blood, a plastic tarp, and a broken cell phone. Lab results confirmed what Sonia suspected. The blood belonged to Illyra. And the phone, after careful data recovery, contained only one video. It was shaky and dark, but in it a voice sounding like Caspian said, "This is just in case they try to twist the story. I didn't mean for this to happen." She wouldn't stop screaming. Then silence. The clip ended abruptly. The discovery reignited public interest. Local news stations picked up the story again. For a brief moment it seemed like justice might finally come, even if Caspian was already dead. But then something even stranger happened. A tip came in from a woman in New Mexico who claimed she saw a man resembling Caspian working at a roadside bar under a different name, Lars Fennick. She said he kept to himself, never used credit cards, and lived in a trailer on the edge of a dried-up riverbed. The description matched Caspian almost perfectly. Tall, angular features, one silver tooth, a scar above his right eyebrow. Authoritarians in New Mexico were dispatched to the location. When they arrived, the trailer was already empty. Inside, they found a burned mattress, a pair of boots that matched Caspian's shoe size, and a notebook filled with erratic entries. Some pages were scratched out violently. Others referenced Illyra in fragmented phrases. She knew too much, tried to run. No one will ever find her. It was now clear Caspian was alive. A nationwide manhunt was launched. Airports, bus stations, and train depots were alerted. His face was added to the federal most wanted registry. But he had vanished again, like a shadow slipping between cracks. The twist sent shockwaves through the community. The man everyone thought dead had evaded justice once more. But perhaps the most disturbing part was still to come. Sanja, unable to shake the feeling that something had been overlooked, returned to the unmarked trail near Lake Emberlin. After revisiting drone footage from months prior, she spotted something odd, a shape near the tree line that hadn't been there before Caspian's disappearance. Using the coordinates, she and a cadaver dog team returned to the location. They unearthed what appeared to be a crude, stone-lined pit. Inside were remnants of burned clothing, bones, and metallic fragments matching the camera Illyra always carried. A forensic pathologist later confirmed the remains were human. Illyra had likely been killed the night she vanished and hastily burned in an attempt to cover the crime. But with no full skeleton and only partial remains, no one could say exactly how she died. The mystery of the murder deepened, and the man responsible was now a ghost. Always one step ahead, the news of the partial remains sent ripples far beyond Dovetail Ridge. Media outlets descended again, flashing images of Caspian Volik across televisions and headlines like a phantom stalking justice. The discovery of Alira's burned bones in the makeshift fire pit seemed to finally confirm what so many suspected. But still, no full body, no murder weapon, and no killer in custody. The investigation had answers, but no resolution. And as the search intensified, so did the mystery surrounding Caspian's movements and motives. Sonja Quade became the center of the case, leading the charge with law enforcement now relying on her unconventional skills. Through meticulous research, she traced financial breadcrumbs Caspian likely thought were invisible. Although he used cash, he had made one mistake. A small-town pawn shop in Arizona reported buying a silver bracelet with the initials EV engraved on the inside. The item was distinctive. It had belonged to Alira. Surveillance footage showed a man matching Caspian's description pawning the bracelet under the alias Lars Fennick, the same name he had used at the roadside bar in New Mexico. Sonja mapped the path Caspian had taken after staging his death. She identified a pattern. Abandoned mining towns, forgotten counties, rural areas with no surveillance, no questions. It became clear that Caspian was not just fleeing, he was hiding with purpose. He had turned into something more than a fugitive. He had become a man who understood the gaps in the system and how to move through them undetected. Yet each breadcrumb, each shadow, made him more real again. Less ghost, more monster. The FBI took over the case officially. Their behavioral analysis unit profiled Caspian as methodical, patient, and deeply narcissistic. He believed he could outwit everyone, and so far he had. But the profile suggested something else. He wouldn't stop. He was likely watching the investigation unfold. He needed control. He needed to see the consequences of his actions play out. That was his weakness. Then something chilling happened. A local journalist named Keziah Rowlands, who had been reporting on Alira's case from the beginning, received a package in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a flash drive. The file it contained was a series of images, blurry and disturbing. In one, a woman resembling Alira was shown with a look of fear. Another depicted what looked like a blood-streaked room. The final image was a blurred figure, most likely Caspian, standing beside a fire. Authorities verified the contents were authentic, though the metadata was corrupted. The chilling implication? Caspian was taunting them. The images were never shared publicly. They were deemed too sensitive. But Keziah, shaken and desperate for the truth, released a podcast detailing the contents, igniting public rage and renewed interest in the case. Suddenly, the world wanted Caspian caught. He wasn't just a murderer anymore, he was a predator who enjoyed his legacy of horror. Numerous tips began flooding in. Sightings came from across multiple states: Montana, Texas, Oregon. Most turned out to be dead ends, but one tip stood out. A hiker reported stumbling upon a remote cabin deep in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in Colorado. He didn't see anyone, but there were fresh tire tracks and a fire burning in a stone ring. The hiker had snapped photos of the cabin. Sonja analyzed them and noticed something familiar. Etched into the wooden doorframe was a phrase in Czech, "Pres popul pravda ne prakazi," which translated to, "Truth does not pass through ashes." Caspian was of Czech descent. It was a quote from a poem he once referenced in an old letter to Alira at a law enforcement raided the cabin days later. It was empty. Still warm. Inside were survival rations, maps, burner phones, and, most disturbingly, news clippings from Dovetail Ridge, all about Alira's case, many marked with notes in the margins. He was still watching, still moving, still waiting. But one thing was clear. Caspian wasn't just hiding. He was playing a game. Back in Dovetail Ridge, Harlan visited what remained of the fire pit where his sister's bones had been discovered. He stood in silence, staring at the blackened earth. No tears, just a promise. He wouldn't stop, not until the man who had torn his family apart faced the justice he had so far escaped. And far away, in another nameless town, a man with a scar above his brow stood at a payphone dialing a number that no longer existed. He smiled faintly, then walked into the night, leaving behind only footprints that would vanish with the next wind. Spring returned to Dovetail Ridge with a cruel sense of irony. Flowers bloomed along the same paths where search teams had once dragged cadaver dogs. The lake thawed, the forests turned green again, and still, no closure came for Elira Grieve. Her funeral had been held with an empty casket, filled only with soil from the burn site where fragments of her bones were found. The town mourned her like a ghost that never truly left. The headlines had faded, the reporters moved on, and the law enforcement task force shifted resources elsewhere. But one person refused to move forward. Harlan Grieve had transformed into a man entirely shaped by grief and obsession. He sold his carpentry business, moved out of his family home, and converted a small trailer into a mobile research unit. Inside, he pinned maps, photos, timelines, and strings connecting every known movement of Caspian Volek since the day he vanished. He spent every waking hour tracking down rumors, checking bus stops, truck routes, and rental cabins across the Pacific Northwest. He rarely slept. He barely spoke to anyone. Caspian had not only taken Elira, but he had taken Harlan's sense of peace, his ability to feel joy. All that remained was purpose and the hunt. One night, nearly a year after Caspian's disappearance, Harlan received a call from Sonja Quaid. She had been contacted by a retired park ranger from Idaho who'd discovered a sealed, waterproof case buried behind a ranger station that was being demolished. Inside the case was a burner phone, an old pistol, and a black journal. The journal's contents were disturbing. Pages of confessions, strange riddles, and reflections on guilt and control. Caspian had written the entries in third person, referring to himself as the vessel and Elira as the truth that cracked the mask. He described dreams of fire, screams that wouldn't end, and being watched by the brother with ashes in his mouth. Most chilling was a set of coordinates scribbled across one page. Harlan drove there immediately. The location led him deep into the Sawtooth wilderness. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a hunting knife, he trekked for hours until he reached a hollowed-out cave marked with strange stone symbols. Inside, he found remnants of a campsite. Empty water bottles, a shredded tarp, and another message scratched into the rock wall. "There's no body because I buried myself long ago." Law enforcement was called, and a full forensic sweep began. No bones were found. No DNA, nothing to indicate Caspian had actually been there recently. But what they did find was another camera memory card taped beneath a stone slab. It contained a final video, dated 3 months prior. In it, Caspian sat in the dark, illuminated by firelight. His face was lean, gaunt, almost skeletal. He spoke to the camera like it was Elira, apologizing, ranting, then laughing. At the end, he held up a slip of paper with the phrase, "Catch me in the reflection, not in the flesh." The message was as cryptic as it was haunting. To Harlan it confirmed one thing. Caspian was alive, but unraveling. A man no longer fueled by escape, but by delusion. The net was tightening, but Caspian's mind was fraying faster than any cage could. Close. 2 months later. An anonymous call led authorities to a secluded mountain lake in Oregon. There they found another makeshift shelter, but this time blood smeared the walls. More importantly, a boot was found, half buried in the mud. Inside the boot was a severed foot, DNA confirmed to be Caspian Volek's. The discovery stunned everyone. If true, Caspian might be dead, or someone wanted the world to believe he was. The foot had been crudely cut. Forensics couldn't determine if it was self-inflicted or an attack. There was no sign of the rest of his body, just that one piece. Speculation exploded. Had he taken his own life in a final act of madness? Or had someone else finally caught up to him? The official report listed Caspian as presumed dead. Again. But Harlan didn't believe it. He kept tracking. He knew Caspian too well. A severed foot wasn't a grave, it was a distraction. A twisted calling card. Years later, hikers passing through the Oregon woods would tell stories of a gaunt man who watched from a distance, then vanished into the trees. A man with a limp. A man with one foot. Alira's case never closed. Her name remained carved on a memorial stone overlooking Lake Emberlin, and in the shadows the man who killed her may still be watching, waiting, smiling behind a mask no one has yet torn away.